Hello, and welcome to your next lecture on New States and Nationalism for AP World History. In order to discuss nationalism, we need to definitely define it. And the idea that nationalism is based off of the idea that nationality should determine borders. For most of history, that nationality is based off of language. So the French border should stop where people stop speaking French. Religious tensions also sometimes create issues amongst nationalities, but nationhood is the idea that your border should associate with your culture or ethnic group, which oftentimes is based off of language. The first attempt at this was actually under the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. The Treaty of Westphalia ended the 30 Years' War in the Holy Roman Empire, and this war, basically the results of the war was a creation of more borders within the Holy Roman Empire that matched religious beliefs. And this is the first time we actually see where borders should not necessarily be determined by some higher entity or some kind of political figure just because they said that their border starts and stops here. At this point, the idea of sovereignty and the idea of the people's consideration being taken into the drawing of borders with the Treaty of Westphalia. This is where we create our first nation-state ideal. The nation-state is the idea that the government that is ruling a group of people should rule a specific type of people. And that is something that is new for the mid-1600s and something that is kind of a revolutionary idea. This idea is going to become part of the French Revolution. As the French were expanding, actually during the French Revolution, they were fighting a foreign war against Austria, and they actually expanded their borders. They were successful within their foreign battles. And as a result of that, the idea that the French border should continue into Belgium or into some Switzerland or into some territories where French was actually spoken was born out of the French Revolution. Napoleon is going to continue that idea with his campaigns throughout the Napoleonic era. Napoleon is going to spread this idea of nationalism. And his Napoleonic Code is a very nationalistic constitution that he wrote that promotes the idea of sovereignty amongst a group of people that are associated with a specific nationality. And as he spreads throughout Europe, he spreads that idea with him. Prior to 1850, the nationalist movement was primarily a liberal concern. Liberals were concerned with individual rights and the idea that nationhood supports human beings' ability to have their basic human rights is going to correlate as we spread, the idea of nationalism spreads. After the 1870s, nationalism becomes the most important force in Europe and will actually be one of the leading causes of World War I. One of the most significant examples of nationalism can be found in the process of German unification. So up until Napoleon, the Holy Roman Empire was just a set of Germanic states in the middle of Europe. They were cooperative in regards to economics for the most part, but these borders were kind of drawn out with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, and they hadn't really changed very much up to the Napoleonic era. In 1806, as Napoleon's kind of walking through Europe, he manages to disintegrate the Holy Roman Empire and he ends that title completely. So the first Holy Roman Emperor was crowned in 800 under Charlemagne, and that idea and that entity is going to exist for basically 1,000 years when Napoleon ends it in 1806. What he does is he creates the Confederation of the Rhine. You can see in the map to the left what the Confederation of the Rhine looked like. So some of the Confederation states are going to go down into the Italian peninsula, obviously into what is today Poland, some of the Baltic areas, and some of the territories that modern day are the Ukraine and things of that nature. That basically what is going on with Putin trying to kind of expand into Europe a little bit. Some of those territories are going to be considered part of the Confederation of the Rhine. The two strongest states in the Confederation were Austria, which is headed by the old Habsburg family. We've been talking about the Habsburgs throughout this course, and you will talk about them constantly next year in AP Euro. And then, of course, Prussia. The capital of the Prussian state is Berlin, so obviously Prussia is going to lead out in this German unification movement. And it was headed by the Hohenzollern families, and this guy named Otto von Bismarck, who you've met before, was chancellor. Chancellor's kind of like prime minister. The idea of a unified Germany was super, super scary to the French and the British. You can see geographically why having a massive German state would be a little bit of a concern for this new French Empire and for this new British Empire. To combine all of Central Europe into one big state gives a huge amount of material resources, a huge amount of economic power to one entity. The British and the French really liked having a loose confederation of German states. They didn't want a big, powerful state right next door to them. And obviously they were right, because World War I and World War II are going to happen. One of the biggest issues was dealing with Austria, whether Austria, under this old monarchy that had been in existence since the Dark Ages, should even be part of a big, massive German state. Well, according to nationalism, they all speak German. There are different forms of the Germanic language. Remember, these are all those old Germanic tribes that were never conquered by the Romans. And so they have a lot of the same cultural tendencies. They have a lot of the same belief systems. And so that becomes part of the issue on whether Austria should be included in a big German state. The French and the British could not get on board with that. There's no way they wanted a unified Germany that included both Prussia and Austria in one big state. Also, Otto von Bismarck did not necessarily want to deal with the Habsburgs in regards to creating a unified Germany. Who would be in charge, the Hohenzollerns or the Habsburgs? And so that becomes a source of contention as well, which ultimately will lead to a war between Austria and Prussia. The other thing to consider in German unification is how amazing Prussia is at this point. The Prussian military was kind of like the Sparta of Europe for this time period. They were amazingly well trained. They had awesome military techniques. They were super powerful, super progressive in regards to industrialized military campaigns. They were really, really strong, which obviously will help lead to World War I as well. And their economy, because these states are basically going to be leading out in the Second Industrial Revolution, the Prussian economy is absolutely the best in Central Europe at this point. Because the French are dealing with the revolution and then with Napoleon, and the country's a little bit financially in ruins, and so this German state, being this Prussian little German state, is going to be massively economically powerful. And again, this is a threat to the British. This is a threat to the French. So what ends up happening is this war called the Danish War, which starts in 1864. If you look on the map, you can see this territory that's circled called Schleswig and Holstein. These are German states that the King of Denmark is going to attempt to annex. Obviously, Prussia doesn't want these territories that are technically German in culture to become part of Denmark. And so what ends up happening is Prussia goes to Austria, and Prussia says, "Hey, Austria, can you help us fight against against Denmark to make sure that Schleswig and Holstein do not get annexed into Denmark?" And Austria says, "Sure." So the Austrian army goes in, helps Prussia, and Schleswig and Holstein does not get annexed into Denmark. And as a result of that, the Austrian military actually gets a little bit weakened, because what ends up happening is this is an opportunity for Prussia to fight an already tired Austrian military, which is going to be a key to their success in what becomes the Austrian-Prussian War. So the Austro-Prussian War, also known as the 7 Weeks' War, basically at this point, the person who creates war, the person who declares war, is now significant. It's now important. That's something that came out of the Napoleonic Wars. One of the things about the Napoleonic Wars was that because Napoleon created all this problem, the French government ends up having to pay a bunch of people because they were fighting them. And so Bismarck, the Prussian chancellor, does not want to declare war on anyone. He wants everyone to declare war on him. The key to that is that he's never going to have to pay for a war. He's never going to have to necessarily, because he's going to win. His military is amazing, and he knows that. So how to trick Austria into war? So what he does is he kind of creates this diplomatic relationship with Russia. In 1863, he kind of makes this deal with Russia. He there was a Polish rebellion where the Poles were trying to gain their independence from Russia. Remember in the last and the other lecture with the Russian imperialism, we talked about the separating out of Poland between Russia, Austria, and Prussia. And so Bismarck sends in troops to kind of help Russia out. Well, as a result of that, Russia kind of owes a favor to Bismarck. So what he does is he says, hey, if I get into a war with Austria, can you just stay out of it? And Russia says, all right. In 1865, Bismarck meets with the leader of France, Napoleon III, to try to get the French to remain neutral if there's a war between Prussia and Austria. The deal was, if that were the case, and Napoleon III stayed out of it, and allowed him basically to create a unified Germany, then Napoleon III would gain some territory. Obviously, it would be Austrian territory, but he would gain some territory. So Napoleon III says, sure. So now Bismarck has ensured that this war is only going to be between Austria and Prussia. As a result of that, he's going to be able to concentrate all of his military forces on this one border and basically just annihilate the Austrian forces. In 1866, he actually gets the Italian state named Piedmont to join in with him. So what he's going to manage to do is split the Austrian forces. So while he only has to fight a one-front war, Austria is going to have to fight a two-front war, which is, again, going to weaken the Austrian military significantly and make this war very easy to win for Prussia. The problem is that this completely violates the German Confederation treaties, and so this is super secret, and he really kind of shouldn't have done it in regards to international diplomacy, but nobody really can argue with him at this point. So what he does is he says that this German territory called Holstein, that Austria controlled this Holstein, and that Austria did something wrong in regards to the treaty that created the Schleswig-Holstein issue. And so Austria sends in military into this territory, and Bismarck says, oh, look, they're sending in military. I have to defend myself. I have to defend Prussia. And now you have a war between Austria and Prussia. At this point, this is where people realize how strong and amazing the military of Prussia is, because Austria is going to be completely annihilated as a result of this war. As a result of the Austrian-Prussian War, the 7 Weeks' War, Bismarck sets up what's called the North German Confederation. You can see on the map here what the North German Confederation consisted of. You can see that the territory goes straight up to the Russian border. You can see this territory. The light beige territory that was once part of Austria is that land that he's going to give to Napoleon III as a result of their secret treaty. That territory is called Alsace and Lorraine, and we will visit Alsace and Lorraine again, especially during World War I and World War II. Now the problem is, how does he get the southern German states? Well, he's going to have to trick France into war, which again, Bismarck, being an amazing diplomat that he is very successful at doing that. Basically, the foundation of the Franco-Prussian War is founded in a empty throne in Spain. A Hohenzollern cousin could have taken the throne of Spain. However, the French, Napoleon III, does not want that, because he would be in the middle of a Hohenzollern sandwich. So you would have a Hohenzollern on the throne of Spain, a Hohenzollern on the throne of Prussia, and then you have this random France in the middle. Obviously, the Frenchies are not really settled with that. That does not make them happy. And so the French protested the Hohenzollern Spanish king, and when the ambassador goes to meet with Napoleon III, they have a conversation, and basically the Prussian ambassador was like, okay, I get it, I understand. He then sends a telegram to Bismarck saying, this was my conversation with Napoleon III, this is how he was reacting to what we said. What Bismarck does is he edits the telegram to make it sound like the German ambassador was super, super rude and awful to Napoleon III. And then he takes an edited version of the Ems Telegraph and he distributes it to Parisian and French newspapers. So the French newspapers publish this conversation between the German ambassador and Napoleon III, where the German ambassador looks like he was just a complete jerk to Napoleon III. And as a result, the French people tell Napoleon III, you must defend our honor. How can you let the Germans speak to you like this? We need to go to war. And so the French, Napoleon III, will end up declaring war on the North German Confederation. because of a fake telegram. Genius on Bismarck's idea, on Bismarck's part. So this is a genius way to get the French to declare war. The southern German states are basically stuck in the middle. They have because the war is going to be fought on their land. So they can either join with Bismarck and join with Prussia, who obviously their military is amazing. Obviously Bismarck is a super diplomat at this point. Or they can ally with Napoleon III and possibly get wiped out anyway. And so the southern German states ally with Prussia, ally with the North German Confederation, and basically the Prussian forces and these new southern German state forces are going to wipe out Paris, wipe out the king. They capture Napoleon III. Napoleon III will actually be sent to a prison in Britain, where he basically lives out his days. And Kaiser Wilhelm is going to be crowned the first German emperor at the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles on January 18th, 1871. So the Germany that you know was created at the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles in 1871. So we officially have Germany on the map. The Treaty of Frankfurt is what ends the Franco-Prussian War. And in that treaty, it says that France has to pay Germany for the war because Napoleon III declared war on the North German Confederate States. Again, Bismarck is a genius. And the French territories are going to be, or the French state is going to be occupied by German troops until they pay it back. Hopefully you're seeing what's going to be the setup for World War I. As a result of this tension between the French and Germans, that's going to be something that's going to feed into what ultimately becomes World War I. Here is what is going to be set up. And you can see Belgium is put on the map as a buffer state. Belgium today, actually about half the population speaks French. The other half speaks like a Dutch German. And then Switzerland is also going to be put on the map as a buffer state between the French and the Germans. The territory that I was talking about is the Alsace-Lorraine territory. That territory is going to go back to Germany as a result of the Treaty of Frankfurt. The people who live in Alsace-Lorraine actually speak French. So you can see how nationalism is going to play into this a little bit later, because this territory is going to be part of the reason for World War I. Moving on to new nations, the Cherokee Nation is an autonomous government of Native Americans that negotiated treaties with the U.S. government that lasted from 1794 to 1907. So the problem is that they kept getting moved. The first big move was in 1802. The Cherokee Nation had to move out of Georgia as part of a territory agreement that the Cherokee Nation made with the United States, and as a result of that, Georgia will become a state. So in order for Georgia to gain statehood, the Cherokees had to be moved out. So that's one of the first times that they moved. They set up a new reservation in Arkansas. And this was set up in 1850, and they developed, while they're there, they developed their own Supreme Court, they developed their own democracy, they developed their voting districts, and they write a constitution in 1827. They had 3 branches of government. Basically, the government that was set up for the Cherokee Nation was very similar to what the United States had set up. In 1850, President Andrew Jackson issues the Indian Removal Act. And as a result of that, the Cherokee now have to move again out to Oklahoma. So what Jackson wanted to do was annex Arkansas, annex some of that territory, and he wanted to gain access to that land for agricultural purposes and the, kind of that whole manifest destiny idea. And we end up with the Trail of Tears, where thousands of Cherokee Indians die basically because of a forced migration. Andrew Jackson forced the Cherokees off their lands, and as a result of that movement, a lot of people cannot handle the migration physically, because it is very difficult migration, and as a result of that, the Cherokee Nation ends up being in this reservation in Oklahoma. They stay on this reservation in Oklahoma for a very long period of time. One of the biggest things about the Cherokee Nation is that they actually support the Confederacy in the Civil War. Obviously, as a result of the end of the Civil War, the Cherokee Nation had to free their own slaves, and the U.S. offered citizenship to any members of the Cherokee Nation. The Cherokee Nation is weakened by this, both economically and basically in numbers. A lot of the Cherokee who were part of the Cherokee Nation and who lived in Oklahoma choose citizenship with the United States and actually leave the reservation. And so this is going to disrupt some of their population numbers. And of course, freeing the slaves is going to cause some issues for their labor sources, for their economy. So this the Civil War ultimately weakens the Cherokee Nation. In 1898, under the Curtis Act, the U.S. basically gets rid of the Cherokee Nation government, and he incorporates the reservation's land into the United States in Oklahoma. That reservation still exists today, and technically the Cherokee Nation does have their own government, but the purpose of that government is really to kind of run diplomatic relationships with the United States government. The U.S. government has the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and there's still a lot of treaties and negotiations going on between those two reservations. So ultimately, the end of the official Cherokee Nation is in 1907. Today, there is a Cherokee Nation as a form of kind of nationalism, but in reality, it's not an autonomous government at all. Another new nation that develops during this time period is the Zulu Kingdom. This is a monarchy that manages to set itself up in southern Africa. The first real chief, king of the Zulu Kingdom is Shaka. Shaka becomes chief in 1816, and he reorganizes the military. He introduces some new weapons. The Shaka spear is this super aerodynamic, amazing weapon that is going to be super successful against the British in several wars. And the Shaka are actually going to do Shaka is going to actually create a lot of advantages for the Zulu Kingdom. He organizes the Zulu church. He organizes their economy. He basically creates this little kind of African kingdom in southern Africa. The Anglo-Zulu War in the late 1800s is where the Zulu are going to fall apart. At first, the Zulu are super successful because of their military techniques that were set up by Shaka. The British is going to be able to capture the Zulu king in 1882, and ultimately the British are going to absorb the Zulu lands into South Africa. So this map to the left kind of gives you an idea of what was going on in South Africa. You can see the Cape Colony with Cape Town. And then you have the Xhosa tribe that is kind of this buffer tribe between the Zulu kingdom and the British. And ultimately, the British are going to also take out that tribe and then continue up further north along this coastal region, which makes sense that the British would want that territory as they continue to expand their diamond mines. The Port Natal is a super important port city for the British, and eventually pretty much the Zulu tribe is going to be wiped out as a result of the Anglo-Zulu War. When we look at the Balkan States, we're talking about this territory that once was part of the Ottoman Empire. You can see this map where it's showing you how the Ottoman Empire is going to slowly lose land, and we end up with new states. These new states are a direct result of anti-imperialistic ideals. The idea was that they didn't want Austria-Hungary to have those states, but they didn't want the Ottoman Empire to have those states either. So this is nationalism at its top. So Serbia becomes a country officially in 1835 when they write their constitution, and it took them a long time to gain their independence from the Ottoman Empire. So they revolted from 1804 to 1815. Serbia basically gets put on the map as a result of that, and Serbia is going to be super, super important for World War I as well. Russia is going to support Serbian independence. The Russians feel that this territory, this Romanian, Serbian, Montenegro, these people in this eastern territory are Slavic, and so they feel that the Russian Empire actually feels that they are kind of the protector of these people, and so they want these states to kind of be created as a way to both weaken the Ottoman Empire, who they've been fighting with over the Black Sea for centuries, but they also don't want Austria-Hungary to become super powerful either. So this becomes a huge issue that will lead into World War I. Romania is going to gain its independence from the Ottoman Empire. Basically, there was a Russo-Turkish war that ended with the Treaty of San Stefano in 1878. Romania and Bulgaria are two states that are created out of that Treaty of San Stefano. And then Bosnia-Herzegovina was basically annexed by Austria-Hungary as part of the Congress of Berlin. The Congress of Berlin wasn't just about Africa. They also dealt with this Baltic region that you're looking at. So Bosnia-Herzegovina is going to become part of Austria-Hungary, and again, this that goes against nationalism, that goes against, but it is in support of imperialism, which will ultimately lead to what will become World War I. So take a minute and watch this map move throughout the time period so you can see how the Ottoman Empire is going to be weakened.